What's going on, everybody? Welcome back. Continuing on with the Hemi build. We got the long block all wrapped up in the last video. Today we're going to be working on the valve train. We're going to get the push rods in. We're going to get the rocker shafts put on. We'll get all those torqued to spec. Then we're going to work on a couple of the other things in terms of we're going to get the valve covers all cleaned up, and we've got some special wrinkle paint to kind of pay homage to the old Hemi style with the crinkled valve covers. So looking forward to that. And we're just going to do a little bit of wrapping up a couple of things. So here, let's check out what we're going to be doing. To start, we're going to get the heads all torqued down into place, and then we got a few things that we're going to be putting on today. So we got our oil housing O-rings in, so we're going to get the engine flipped over. We'll get that taken care of. So we got our rocker shafts, our push rods, those are going to get installed. We are running with part of the whole Holley swap kit is the Hooker Black Hawk engine mount brackets. We're going to get those mounted on. Once those are all done, we're going to come over here. Here's our original factory valve covers. We're going to get these all cleaned up, painted with this awesome Wrinkle Plus VHT high temperature paint. We got some new ARP bolts to go in. So excited to get the front of this motor or the top of this motor all squared away so that we can get things ready to rock and roll in other cases. So again, guys, I appreciate you following along. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. Make sure you hit the notification button so that you can be notified of any of the upcoming videos. And with that, let's have at it. All right, guys, to get these things bolted down and torqued into place, it's very similar to the torque sequence that we did on the oil pan. So we're going to go in a counterclockwise rotation. So it's going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That's going to be the 15 millimeter bolts. Then when we get to the top ones, it's going to be 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. So if you can just imagine yourself going in a circle going out, that's how it's going to work. So for starters, these 15 millimeter bolts are going to start, we're going to start at 25 foot-pounds. Then we're going to go to the top ones and we're going to knock these in at about 15 foot-pounds. Then we're going to come back to these ones and we're going to give it, we're going to go 40 foot-pounds just to tighten them down a little bit. Make sure these are still at 15. And then we're going to do just like we did with the main cap bolts and the rod bolts, we're going to do a 90 degree. So this is going to be 40 foot-pounds with a 90 degree torque on that. And then we're going to come back to these top bolts and we're going to tighten those down at the last of 25. So with that being said, let's grab our torque wrenches and get at it. So starting off 25 foot-pounds. Now we're going to hit these ones at 15. Come back to these ones and we're going to go 40 foot-pounds. Once that's done, again, just double check, make sure these are still at 15. They should be. Just like we did, like I said, with those the crank main cap bolts and the rod bolts, we're just going to make a line, just a straight line, so that we know where 90 degrees is going to go. Of course, if you have the proper torque wrench, you don't need to do this. But I prefer to have more of a visual. Once you mark those, go ahead and grab your, I'm going to go 90 degrees. Then the last thing we do is torque those top ones down to 25. And that's it. Now let's get the other side done. All right, next it's time to drop in the push rods. So you have your small push rods and you have your longer push rods. Your longer push rods are your exhaust ones, which are on the bottom, and your shorter ones are your intake ones, which go on the top. So one of the things I like to do here is just have a little bit of just a little bit of motor oil. So I just like to dip the ends of both ends of the push rods in the oil just to give it a little bit of lubrication. So we'll start with the top ones here. And now the bottoms. So one of the things I read with this is when we go to put the rocker shafts on, what you want to do is we actually want to rotate the engine about 45 degrees from top dead center. What that's going to do is it's going to get all of the pistons off the top of the deck, because as we tighten this down, the valves are going to want to open. So we want to make sure that we're not going to have any interference issues. So as you remember from the previous videos, we had put this on top dead center in order to put the timing set on appropriately. So basically we're still sitting at top dead center. So what we're going to do is we're just going to go 45 degrees. Obviously, if this is straight up and down, 90 degrees would be at about 3 o'clock. We're going to want to go somewhere around maybe like, about halfway in between. So just simply rotate it. I would say about there. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to get the rocker shafts put on. You can see that actually the rocker shafts are marked with an I for intake. So pretty self-explanatory there. So the intake rocker shafts are going to go at the top, but it gets a little tricky because you want to make sure that you get everything lined up and that the push rods are inside these little cups, and you want to make sure that the push rods are set in all the way in to the engine. So they might feel like they're in there, but you just want to ensure that they're good. So we're going to set this in place here. It can get a little tricky. There. Now, just lift up the slightest little bit, just to make sure that you get the push rods into little cups. There we go. Patience is key here. And if anybody has any tricks, because I've literally been trying to do this off camera for about 45 minutes. And I just keep laughing because it just keeps falling out. So, and then the other thing, once you think you have them in place, double check, because you probably don't. So that looks like those should be in place. So, and when you're tightening these rocker shafts down, you're going to want to tighten them down equally. Stupid push rods are falling out. Once you think you have them in place, just give them a little bit of a roll with your fingers. Push down a little bit. And then just tighten these by hand, just to get some tension on them. And then double check everything again. Just make sure that they're sitting in the pockets so that they're all the way down and they're in the pocket on the rocker shaft. You can do that by just kind of wiggling it and twisting it a little bit. Once you get the intake rocker shafts in place, then before bolting them down all the way, you're going to put your exhaust ones on. These ones are actually a little bit easier. So these ones will just slide right into place. And then just snug these down just the same way. Do the seam check just to make sure that they're set into the pockets the right way. Give them a little bit of a wiggle, a little bit of a twist. And you just want to snug these down in sequence. It's going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So, and again, just be super, super careful. Watching your push rods the entire time to make sure that they're still in the pockets. As you go, they'll start to compress the springs. That's normal. And then these get torqued in the same sequence at 195 inch-pounds.
And then just repeat the same thing for the other side.
All right, now that we have the other side all complete, one of the things that I want to try to do is spin the motor around a few revolutions just to make sure that the rockers are moving the way they're supposed to, and if we can technically see if there's any sort of binding in the push rod. So let's push this thing around a couple revolutions here. Like everything seems to be working okay. No binding, no funky noises. Valves are all opening and closing as they're supposed to. All right. Now what I'm going to do is just double check that all of the rocker shafts are still torqued to spec. Now flip it over, take off this housing, and we can put the new O-rings in place. I believe that's where the oil pressure sending unit went, but I'm drawing a blank. I forget what was on the bottom of this housing. Guess I'm gonna have to look that up. If somebody knows and wants to put it in the comments, I'd really appreciate that. New O-rings, inner one and outer one. Couldn't find the torque specs for this housing, so I'm just going to go with the old tights tight, two tights broke theory. Awesome. Well, now that this is done, while we have it rolled onto its side, now's a perfect opportunity to put the motor mounts in place. These are the Hooker Blackheart engine mounts that come with the Holley swap kit. Passenger side is going to go right there. I'm going to get the 4 bolts in there. Just going to add a little bit of blue Loctite and button that thing down. There. Now we'll just roll it over, get the mounts on the other side. So this side's a little different because you're going to utilize the 4 existing mounting holes that were there, but we're also now going to utilize the 5th hole. So they actually want to, I guess, over brace it and use the 5th hole here. So off camera, I had to run a tap through that because that was a little on the corroded side because obviously it was not being used for anything. So ran a tap through it, all good to go. Now we're just gonna stick these 5 bolts in, snug this one down, and we got this side all wrapped up.
Once the engine was all set, it was time to get the valve covers all cleaned up. Just using a little bit of engine degreaser and a soft toothbrush and just scrubbing the oil out of the crevices.
Get some new valve cover gaskets on these things. So we're still gonna paint these, but I'm not gonna paint them right at this moment. I'm just gonna put the gaskets on just so we can set them on the engine so that we can keep debris out of the heads right now. Taking the valve covers off these engines, you'll know that basically it's kind of like a stud with a nut on it that sits inside like a rubber isolator or a rubber washer of some sort. So basically it looks like this. So you have your rubber washer. This actually sits in the valve cover like this. That actually presses in, and then there's this goes through and screws into the head. However, these things are garbage, these nut and bolt systems. So I actually am going with the ARP bolts. So what you have to do is, this is in place. You just got to actually just put it in a vise and just hammer down with a punch to punch this out to relieve those. All right, so this is the first gasket. We'll get the next one in. When putting these gaskets on, there is a front and back, because if you try to put it on one way, you'll get all the way to the end like I just did, and it won't fit around the corresponding bolt holes. So just be aware of that. And if you put it on the right way, it actually fits. Imagine that. Imagine that, doing something the right way and having it work. What a concept. So really kind of push it down, make sure it's stuck in the groove the whole way. You don't want to stick it on the cylinder head and then all of a sudden have it pinch it. So there you go. Let's drop these onto place. Fancy. So you can see that these are still a little rusty, these rubber grommets here, but when I go to put them on, when I go to paint the valve covers, I'm just going to leave them on. So we're going to paint right over them. So they'll have that little bit of a wrinkle paint on these grommets here. Again, we're using ARP fasteners for this. You don't have to. I'm doing it only because I had them. So it made it a little easier. But you can always reuse the ones that are in there if you really wanted to. But for me, they're just kind of ugly. A couple of them stripped on me. And then just get them back in place. So I'm not going to torque these down, only because we're going to be taking the valve covers back off this thing, and I don't really want to squish the gasket at the moment. So I'm just going to set these in place. Start screwing them in a little bit here. And then we'll just run them in just kind of snug, just so the valve cover doesn't come off. There we go. Perfect. A little irritated for some reason. I don't know where the heck it went, but I lost one of my valve cover grommets. So we're gonna have to look around and try to find that somewhere. I don't know where the heck it is. That's one of those things where you're like, oh crap, you're missing that one stupid little grommet, and if you can't find it, you gotta call the dealership, and then they try to sell you a whole set of them when you only need one. So that warrants a trip to the junkyard. One of these valve cover bolts is what holds this Holley dipstick tube in place. Just like that. Perfect. Just run those ones down like we did the other side. All right, we've made it this far, so we have to just drop the coil packs in just so we can see what it's gonna look like. Look at that, huh? Well, that's it, guys. That's all I got for today. We got the valve train in, we got the valve covers on, just kind of setting in place right now. We got the top of the motor all torqued, ready to go. Intake manifold's on its way. So for now, that's it. It's all buttoned up, it's all cleaned up, and we will cover up the intake so we don't get anything up in there. And yeah, moving right along. Pretty excited. I think it's looking pretty damn good. I don't know about you, but awesome. So till next time, guys.